Well, kind of lots happened since my last video. So before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you all for 100 subs. Or at least I would say that if I didn't also cross 200. And then 300. Just shy of 400 now. And to think it's all due to this crazy pink chicken. I don't know, it's just really awesome, guys, and it came out of nowhere, and I appreciate the hell out of it. But without any further ado, let's get on with today's video. So Rise is apparently coming to PlayStation and Xbox now. Well, that wasn't on my bingo card. You may remember in my Magnamalo video that I lamented the fact that Rise was hitting PC and getting 4K textures and 60 FPS, and how my PC just couldn't handle it. That bummed me out for sure. But now that it's coming to a PS5 that I do have, I'm excited. So much so, in fact, that I felt the time was right for another flagship sculpt. I debated for a bit who I should do. Do I do Malzeno? It would make sense. I did Maggie for base Rise hitting PC. Malzeno for Sunbreak hitting PS5 is a nifty idea. But I don't quite think I'm ready for an Elder Dragon yet. Instead, I figured I'd do one of my all-time favorites, probably my favorite flagship monster, period. But Lagiacrus isn't even in this game. But mark my words, once Capcom actually listens to us and releases Laggy from Monster Jail and announces him for Monster Hunter 6 or whatever, you know damn well what I'm gonna spend my time doing. You can quote me on that. In the meantime though, I still needed a subject for this video, so I might as well settle for good old Nargacuga.
It's called Sex Panther by
Capcom.
Narga was the bane of my existence back in Freedom Unite, probably my first real speed bump in that game's progression. It's always been a very fun, high-energy monster that never failed to keep me on my toes. Not to mention, the cat bat design was something we just hadn't seen before. I just love everything about this monster. Well, except for his tail hitbox, but hey, that was par for the course back in the good old days. So Nargacuga it is then. Quest accepted. Let's get to it. First things first, I gather up some good references. Editor's note here. Definitely keep that in mind as we move forward. You'll understand. This sculpt was a bit of an emotional roller coaster, let's say. It takes some doing, but spoilers, we do in fact get there. Please keep that in mind and bear with me. The end result is totally worth it. Alright, let's get on with it. So I do my usual thing. I draw my lines, trying to figure out a good size and shape for my armature. So I then continue on with my wire, following the lines I drew to create my core. Everything seems pretty normal so far, and everything looks good to my eye. So I start crumpling up some foil, get it nice and snug, then I tape everything in place, wrap it all up. I do the same with the shoulder and waist areas, and wrap it all up one more time. Then I add the wings, making sure they're the appropriate length, and cover them up with some foil too. I do the same with the legs. Easy. Looking good. Now I cover it with some Sculpey 3, making sure everything is nice and secure. Just the way I like it. Once satisfied, I bake it and cover it with a Super Sculpey base, and then everything kinda went wrong. Normally, I'd keep working. But something came up that took my attention away from the sculpt for a few days. And then, after coming back to it with fresh eyes, I noticed something was off. It's a bit too small. Like, a lot a bit too small. Way smaller than I had intended, and I just didn't catch it until this very moment. See, I don't work in any sort of set scale. By that, I mean I don't want these monsters to be in scale with one another necessarily. If I did, then would this be a massively huge Velocidrome or a freakishly tiny Magnamalo? Really, who's to say? I don't care about that. I just want to make things that have a good shelf presence. I don't want to make things that are absolutely massive. And I'm not interested in making amiibos either, for that matter. As long as I can get the monster to look right compared to itself proportionally, that's really all I'm generally concerned with. But I would like to be somewhat consistent, and when you compare this to, let's say, this Velocidrome, for example, or hell, especially next to this Maggie, I think you can see the disparity crystal clear. Yeah, this won't do. In the end, it all comes down to my reference. It's just too small. So what do? I scale it up, and I start again. And this is Nargacuga Mark II. Already you can see a huge difference. Thankfully, I didn't bake the Mark I a second time yet, so at very least I didn't waste any Super Sculpey. So I apply it to the Mark II, and I notice one of the wings came loose. Okay, no biggie. It's just the one, I can deal with that. And in the process of dealing with it, the second wing came loose. So off with the Super Sculpey again, and now one of the legs comes loose. Jeez, when it rains it pours, eh? I just can't win. And I reinforce all the joints with Sculpey 3 and bake it one more time. I reinforce again, bake again, and cover it again. You seeing a pattern here? I finally begin to move forward and start shaping out the neck, adding clay, smoothing it out. Looking pretty okay, so I start adding the shoulders, just so I can better judge where I'm at and how things are going. To be honest, I feel like I'm getting a bit paranoid at this point, so I'm trying my very best to be careful. I make a temporary guideline that would, in theory, separate the top fur portion of Narga's body from the rest that would actually start getting detail. Then I started adding plates along the bottom of the neck and the chest area. I did what I could to smooth things out, and I even added on the pec armor. And as I started to add more and more detail, I just didn't like it. It just wasn't working for me. So I scrapped it. And off camera, I did something a little drastic. I did some surgery. Yeah, I wasn't sure it would work, and I was on the cusp of either starting over again, or just scrapping this sculpt altogether and coming back to Narga at a later date. See, when I started over, I scaled up my reference, and I think I overcompensated. By like a lot. I overcompensated so much, you'd think I was a member of the NRA. I also had to come to terms with something else. It was just an all-around bad reference. This isn't exactly game accurate. It's more of an artistic interpretation, and that's what steered me in the wrong direction, I think. The chest here especially is far too puffy. And as luck would have it, that's the exact problem I was having with this sculpt. So, after cutting the chest off, I smushed and condensed the foil as much as I could to thin him out. And I covered it all up yet again. And while I was at it, I shortened the arms as well, since they were kinda starting to bother me. Looking at them side to side, the new one's starting to look closer to the original, so I think I'm in a good place now. I add some quick texture so the eventual fur layer will stick easier, and I commit to all my changes one more time and seal my fate with another bait. Now I add on a thin layer of clay so I can start my detailing. First thing I do is add an uncomfortable amount of those Zelda rupee-like diamonds. I do this on both sides, just up to the shoulders. On the bottom, since the shingle method wasn't doing it for me, I changed up my method by simply pressing my tool into the clay and adding texture onto it. For the pecs, I just slapped on a huge glob of clay, shaped it, blended it, textured it, and added my lines the same way. Looking back at what the chest looked like before, I much prefer this. I'm starting to feel like starting over was the right call, but we'll have to wait and see, won't we? After another bake, I start on the arms. This is the true test, to me, to see if this sculpt is on the right track or not. I have a sneaking suspicion that they might be too overly large, but if I can play my sculpting cards right, I might be able to hide it or otherwise make it work. Oh, and these holes I'm digging, those will come into play shortly. Once I complete the diamond pattern from the neck, I continue the plating from the underside and scale it all up. And now it's time to make another regrettable decision! Only thankfully, it's one that I can take back and cover up pretty easily. Actually, it's like the polar opposite of the chest, cause now shingles are the way to go. After pressing them a bit into those valleys from before, and adding some other textures, I'm much happier with the end result. This worked out really well, crisis averted. Now that I have something resembling a plan, doing this again on the second arm took no time at all. It went really smoothly, and when I was done with it, I could finally start seeing my Nargacuga begin to take shape. Time to shift from the front to the back. Before I start the legs, I want to buff them up with some foil. Not just so clay will stick better, but also so I can use less of it and keep the weight down. Also, these aren't meant to look pretty. These will be covered completely with fur later, so I just needed a sturdy base. The bottom half is a different story though. No fur goes here, so once I add my foil, I actually have to care about how these things look. So I add on way more clay than I think I need, and decide to try a subtractive method instead of an additive one. These legs are going to be pretty thin after all, so I think the subtractive method is the way to go. If there's a leg in there somewhere, I just gotta find it. So I start carving away. It takes a while, but once I get used to the amount of control I had, I really started to enjoy it. Once both hind legs are done, I scaled them up and baked it again. Now it's time for the back half of the underside. First thing I wanted to do was bridge the gap between the legs and the newly laid clay to make it look more natural. And once everything's in its place, Nargacuga junk! Then I blend everything together and continue those lines from the chest. And now back to the front. I wanted to start adding the wings, and I noticed that this drill bit is roughly the same thickness as my armature wire, so I use that to bore into the foil and work the wire in. Once it's deep enough, I can easily bend the wire, snip it at the appropriate length, and wrap it along the body to keep it out of the way. I won't need this for a while anyway, it's just good to know I have it. Now I can finally get them off these stilts. Once I bend these, I'll not only have a foundation for the feet, but I'll also have a better idea of how the pose will end up. For the front feet, I just press on a huge lump of clay, make sure it's secured, and then get shaving. Then I start carving out the toes. Poke some holes for the nails. Add the nails. Squish everything together. Add some texture. And add some shingles to mask the transition a bit. And before you know it, that's 1 foot down. And then 2. Also, I had to keep in mind that these aren't meant to sit flush, or at least not yet, because once I bake it, it's time for the back feet. I'm using the subtractive method again, so I made myself some clay risers and blended them into the legs. And if Nargacuga had hooves, I could probably stop here, but alas, I have to make toes. So I press some ridges into a snake of clay, bend it, and press it on. I'm using a scared cat as inspiration here, so having splayed out claws makes sense. Once the toes are good, I start carving out the heel. Again, the pose I'm going for has the legs splayed out and extended, kinda on its tiptoes, so I don't have much room to work with, but I think I managed okay. Once everything's blended, I bake it again. It's also standing really well on its own, which is a great sign. Next up, the wings. Unlike Cutku, there's really not much to them. I just need to drill out a couple quick holes, get some short wires in there, and I can move on to the cosplay. I rolled out some very thin sheets, just lay them over top, smoothing the webbing into the arm where the fur will cover it up later. I work in sections, cutting as I go. Once both sides are covered, I grab a tweezer from my medicine cabinet and just start pinching and pulling until I get this nice ragged look. Very simple, very effective. Time to bake it again. For Narga's razors, I lay down huge flat worms and start carving away at them, trying to get as close to a straight edge as possible. Sounds easy in theory, but in practice, let's just say it took a while. Once I'm happy, I slice some ridges into them with my palette knife, and then I try to smooth them out a bit. Once that's done, I give the wings a nice finishing touch. See, Nargacuga doesn't have flat webbing. His wings are actually covered in fur. So to replicate that, I put down another thin strip of cosclay and just go ham with a silicone shaper tool. It gave me this matted fur look that I really liked, especially when the light hits it and casts some really cool natural shadows. All that's left now is the fur. Originally, I was gonna use Super Sculpey, but the cosclay went so well on the wings, I figured why not keep at it? And so begins my favorite part of this sculpt. The part where I relentlessly stab it thousands upon thousands of times with a sharp, pointy object. After all the headaches, after all the frustration, it felt so good to just let loose like this. It was so cathartic and satisfying to get to this point. This was such a great way to let off some steam, let me tell you. Once the front half's done, I cook it and do the same thing again to the back half. And before long, I'm finally starting to see a Nargacuga. I think this is the first time during this project that I was actually happy with it. And luckily for all of us, it won't be the last. But the best is yet to come. Time to work on the head sculpt. I start with a small foil core, try it on for size, then cover it in a thin layer of clay. From there, I add on some basic shapes to form the snout and the roof of the mouth, and I blend everything together. And then, off camera, I put a whole bunch of teeth and eyes into the oven, which is a totally normal sentence I just said. I figured it would be easier this way as opposed to sculpting as I went, and boy was I right. After filling the upper and lower jaw with teeth, I cook them, and then I start forming out the beak. Again, it's just simple shapes that I blend in and smooth out. Once I'm happy with it, I lay on some scratches and add nostrils. Then I pop in the eyes. Looking pretty mean already. Now it's time to connect the jaws together, which I know looks a little funky for right now, but just you wait. Then I sculpt a quick basic tongue and connect it to the bottom jaw. Once everything's set in place, I reinforce the joints a bit and connect the two parts more seamlessly with some cheeks. And now I can start rounding the face out into a more final shape. After some carving, I make some basic eyelids and smooth everything out. Then I start the detailing. I stipple some dots around the eye area. Then I start making the fur. Then I cook, and I start shaping out the lower jaw and add the necessary details there as well. I'm really liking where this is at right now, but it's not done yet. I whip up a small armature for the ears and attach them to the top of the skull. After that comes the earlobes. Now tell me, is that a Nargacuga or is that a Nargacuga? From every angle, I'm happy with this. Just gotta do some final detailing and try it on for size. I gotta say, I tried really hard to get the size right the first time, and I think I was very successful in that regard. Only there's one issue. Seems the neck is slightly too long now. See, it should be about there. But no biggie, that's a simple fix. That comes later though. For now, while I have the head in the palm of my hands, I want to paint the inside of the mouth. Not that I can't do it later, but once it's attached to the body, I'm gonna lose the amount of control I need to hit all those little crevices and whatnot, so I might as well get it out of the way now. And with that done, it's your turn! I don't need to take off too much. The Dremel makes quick work of that neck. After some cleanup, there, much better. Really starting to look like a Nargacuga now. Dare I say, it almost looks game accurate. I just gotta fill that gap and connect it all together. This doesn't take long. Other than continuing and connecting the bottom of the neck, the rest just gets covered by fur. And once that's done, all that's left now is the tail. I roll up a thick foil core, and for added security, I grab 3 long armature wires. I connect everything with some tape, and now I have this nifty 3-prong plug sort of deal. I wrap it all up and get ready to attach it. Just gotta drill some holes in that Narga booty. And once it's connected, pretty impressive. But you know I can't leave it like that.
That's a huge bitch!
So after a few twists and turns, I'm left with this. I really wanted to bring out the elastic whip-like quality of Nargacuga's tail that we all know and tolerate. Then I cover the whole thing in clay, trying to be mindful of the weight. I kept these layers nice and thin to avoid any drooping or, God forbid, breaking in the oven, since support was gonna be difficult. Once everything's smooth, I take this tool out of my kit and start pressing in the tail spikes. I'm going for the folded up look for reasons that should be obvious. I really like this method. Came out looking pretty cool. Then I rough up the tip a bit, nothing too crazy. Then I continue the underside details. Then I tried adding those big diamond scales he has, but I just didn't like it. So I decided to just cover the entire tail in fur. Hey, I've already gone through so much on this sculpt, and I'm so close to the finish line, so I took an easy out, sue me. And once the amazingly therapeutic fur texturing is done, this Nargacuga sculpt is finally complete. Considering how all of this started and everything else I've been through since this project began, you have no idea how good it feels to look at what I've done here. This came out far better than I thought it would, all things considered, but I'm not quite done yet. Now I gotta cross my fingers, pop it in the oven one last time, and hope that tail holds up. Which thankfully it did.
Got him!
There's 2 kinds of people in this world. The ones who see a problem or a project not going well and decide to suck it up and stubbornly power through no matter what. And then there are the ones who notice a project going south and have the courage to know when to swallow their pride, scrap it all together, and start again fresh. I'm usually in group 1. But the odds were so against me on this one, I felt I had no choice but to give Group 2 a try for once. And you know what? I'm glad I did. Looking at this now, I can safely say that if I tried to power through, especially the way things were headed, I highly doubt I'd be as happy with the end result as I am right now.
Message!
And with that out of the way, it's time to paint. Painting this guy is fairly simple actually. It's a fairly monochrome monster, with lots of black and varying degrees of grays and whites mixed in. So a fully black base coat seemed like a good place to start. Just gotta cover the entire body. Once dry, I paint the rupee scales with a flat gray, trying my best to get the paint into all the recessed areas. Then I used a black dry brush to cover it all up, hoping that the gray would still show through. It does, it just doesn't show up very well on camera. Then I go over all the exposed skin areas with alternating gray and white dry brush. The wings themselves get the same treatment. I go over the edges of the razors with white. And then the beak. I think you're seeing a pattern here. The underside, ironically, is by far the brightest part of Nargacuga's body, so everything gets multiple passes of white dry brushing. And that includes the hind legs. And the tail spikes get it too, which ended up being a really cool effect. Now I finally get to use a new color. The wings get this cool looking red accent. I do this for all the webbing. Then, the part I've been waiting for, I finally get to give Narga his trademark eyeliner. Takes a few passes, but I get there eventually. Then I paint the eyes yellow, and with zen-like patience, I add a nice and thin cat's eye slit. Now I'm about to commit a great sin, an art faux pas if you will. I'm gonna use glossy paint for the fur. Yeah, I know, you aren't generally supposed to use gloss paint on things that are meant to represent something organic or living. I get that. The matte black I use for the base does look good, but it's a bit too flat for my tastes. In the games, Nargacuga's fur has always had this sheen to it. Now, I don't know if it's Charlie or Martin, but regardless, I wanted to try and replicate that. And this seemed like the best way. And once Narga gets his nails did...
I now present to you the Black Panther.
And there it is. Nargacuga is finally complete. What can I say? I love it. Underneath these harsh lights, he looks very shiny and plasticky, but rest assured, that's a camera trick. It looks far more natural and more understated to my eye. The gloss paint was definitely the way to go. Let's not forget where this project started. You know what? Look at this. It's not too often a sculpt actually gets alive before and after, right? Just look at how much of a difference this is. I'm so glad I started over when I did. I wouldn't have been able to get the details like this if I had stuck with a small Mark I version. And so there it is, the product of over a month of pain, suffering, and uncertainty. It really goes to show how important it is to have a good reference from the get-go. A bad reference has a high chance of ending with a bad result. It's just that simple. I'm glad I was able to see that before it was too late. Later than I would have liked, but it is what it is. This is usually the part where I'd say I had so much fun. But no, I can't lie. This was a slog. There were days in the beginning where I didn't even want to look at this thing. So all I can really say honestly is, I did it. I pulled through. If nothing else, this was a fantastic learning experience, and I'm glad I had it when I did. I can't wait to move on to something else though, and put this one behind me finally. So let's roll those glamour shots so I can do just that. That's another quest complete! Only I think I fainted twice. Or maybe I had feline insurance and I fainted 3 times. And almost ran out of heals. But hey, in Monster Hunter, it ain't about speed, it ain't about finesse. All that matters in the end is that you took your foe down and went back to the village with some sweet, sweet rewards for your time. And I think I did just that. If you're a fan of sweet gaming metaphors, or you just like what you saw, don't forget to like that smash button. I'll see you on the next one. Happy sculpting. Peace.